It's a pleasure to join you in this webinar. I'm Lee Hood, co-founder and professor of ISB, and it's my great pleasure today to introduce Eric Topol and have a discussion of his latest book, Super Ager. Eric, as some of you may know, trained as a cardiologist in the 80s and 90s. He actually devised some of the clinical trials that transformed how to deal with heart attacks, and including anti-clotting methods and coronary stents and all of these kinds of things. In the 2000s, Eric shifted at least part of his focus to genomics and the study of how DNA influences health, and at the same time, digital technologies that could assess health, and putting those two things together, and ultimately with big data, he has been a real pioneer in pushing these aspects of health and wellness and healthy aging all along. He was one of the first physicians to really argue that patients should own and control their own data, and he advocates, as I do, that data appropriately approved should become accessible to everyone, so we all have a shot at discovering the hidden subtleties of human complexity and everything. Eric founded and currently leads the Scripps Research Translational Institute in La Jolla, and he's doing large-scale studies now with the program All of Us, a million-person program that looks at the genome and at digital health through wearables and things like that, and other aspects of data that can give insight into health. Eric has written a number of books, and we're obviously going to focus on Super Agers here. And, if I had to summarize his career, I would say, one, he really has pioneered fundamental techniques in cardiology. Two, he's brought genomics and digital health into the mainstream of clinical practice and promoted at the same time patient empowerment and data transparency, and challenge the medical institution to continually innovate while staying compassionate. And of course, a big part of what Eric is known for is evidence-based approach to longevity, which is exactly what we're going to discuss now. So, Eric, I really enjoyed reading your book, I must say. I think it, and I learned a fair amount, and I was very much impressed with the evidence-based approach that you took. So I have two questions. One is, if you had to summarize somewhat concisely, what are the lessons you'd like our listeners to take away from your book? And then two, after that, I'd love you to talk just a little bit about what the evidence-based approach to medicine is, and why it's so important in separating the fluff of longevity from substance.
Yeah, well, Lee, it's really wonderful to be with you. You've been a pioneer in life science and medicine throughout your career, and I think you would qualify as a super ager. That is somebody who's 85 plus, who is cognitively intact with no age-related diseases, cardiovascular or cancer. So, I mean, it's wonderful to be with you. And, in many ways, you've written about this whole field with the 4 Ps, with particularly personalized prediction. That was really what Super Agers was about. And to summarize it, I think we have finally gotten to the point where we can achieve primary prevention of age-related diseases, the big three: cardiovascular, the common cancers, and neurodegenerative diseases. And we couldn't do that before, although I think you were already anticipating it with your work. But now we have all these new layers of data. So not just the electronic health record and the images that can be interpreted by AI with much more um, richness, much more informativeness, just like the labs can be with AI. But also we have the genome. We have polygenic risk scores. We have organ clocks, no less body-wide methylation clocks. And we have new biomarkers that we've never had before. And when you put all this together with multimodal I believe we can really prevent these big three age-related diseases. And in fact, we are going to start a prevention of Alzheimer's trial, hopefully in January, to do exactly that. It's something that hasn't been really ever been possible before, but we didn't have the way to do that. So it's really the multimodal AI to bring all this data, billions of data points at any given person. And it's exciting. It's really exciting. And I think you already had anticipated this field with your work because this is about prediction. And if you can predict who's at high risk and prevent their diseases, we've never done that in medicine. We've talked about it forever, but we've never done it. And I think we're going to do it. And it's really incumbent on us to go after it.
Couldn't agree more. Did you want to say a word about the importance of evidence-based approach to
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
wellness and longevity and all of those things?
Yeah, well, we have a real problem out there now because there's so much real bunk, lack of evidence. We've got anti-aging supplements that don't have any anti-aging data. We've got longevity clinics and we got all kinds of treatments that are out there for supposed to reverse aging, but they haven't ever been proven to do that. And we have a lot of influencers that are advocating things, whether it be rapamycin or whether it be, ultra high protein or, I mean, cold plunges and dry saunas. And I mean, the list goes on and on. Total body MRI. And these are all being marketed heavily, and there's no data to support them. So, what I'm an advocate for, like you, is that where's the evidence? Show me the data, and I think we have that. But, we have to be very particular about what comprises compelling evidence. So we don't have evidence yet that we can prevent age-related diseases, but there's low risk about that, the approaches that we can go after that. On the other hand, reversing aging, which is what some of these entities are claiming, individuals and entities, we don't have any evidence in human beings we can reverse aging. We've got a lot, as you know, Lee, many good shots on goal, like cellular reprogramming, senolytics, things that look like they could make a difference, mesenchymal stem cells, and on and on. But none of them have evidence in human beings. So what I call for is give me solid data. So for example, what do we get from exercise? What do we get from, an anti-inflammatory diet, from sleep health? We have lots of data for these things. We don't have data for a lot of the things that are being pushed now. And so if we stick with the evidence and to change medicine, as you know, you've got to have compelling data. The medical community is slow to change anyway. But in order for them to really pivot to something, a new state of clinical practice, a new standard, they've got to have solid data. It has to be transparent, has to be independently replicated. It's got to be the real deal.
Yep, absolutely. Well, one of the things that is, I think, obvious to most physicians is classic wellness, in a sense, includes three really important things: diet, exercise, and sleep. And I wonder if, again, at a very high level, you could give our audience a sense for each of those three things of what they should be thinking about doing.
Yeah, I mean, this is let's talk about compelling data. These three that have been known, but now we have a lot more detail. So, for example, on the exercise front, we've known that aerobic exercise 5 days a week, which is a recommendation, 30 minutes, whether that's walking or something that's more vigorous, could be, of course, things like bicycling and treadmill and whatnot. But those things are really important. But in addition, the data for resistance strength training and balance training also shows us that that's really important for healthy aging. So that's one thing. And I think we have learned a lot about these other forms of exercise. I used to be a nut about only aerobic exercise, but now I've learned, hey, we got to integrate these other types of exercise if we're going to keep ourselves in that healthy aging path. Now, secondly, the diet, we have had innumerable studies, as you know, to reinforce that the Mediterranean light diet, which is anti-inflammatory, unlike diets that are rich in animal fat, particularly red meat, that this diet is one that's had randomized trials, huge observational studies, and so that is really important, along with avoidance as much as possible of the ultra-processed foods, specific foods that are incriminated for having pro-inflammatory impact. So the diet is important. Then the third on sleep health, this is where there's been big jumps because we've learned that deep sleep, that slow wave portion of sleep, usually in the early part of the night, which is counterintuitive when you think of deep sleep, but it's actually usually yonder early in the first couple of hours of sleep. That is precious. And it is when the lymphatics of our brain clear these metabolic waste products that are pro-inflammatory. So it turns out if you are really work after getting more deep sleep, which many of us, like I had a very poor track record for that when I started to monitor it, uh, that we can get that up to a much higher number just by things like sleep regularity. Going to bed at the same time, wakening the same time. Our body wants to be in a rhythm, but many of us defy that rhythm. And of course, that includes things like you not eating late in the day, not exercising late in the day, things like keeping alcohol intake low because it interferes with deep sleep, lots of things like that. So those big three, but what I called in the book lifestyle factors, because there's many more that are new now that include things like uh, social engagement, being out in nature, having hobbies and a purpose and, a real upbeat attitude things, mental health. And then also these environmental burdens like air pollution, like microplastics, nanoplastics, forever chemicals. These that we're doing nothing about that are pro-inflammatory, increase the risk of neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and cardiovascular. So we know lots of factors now, not just diet, sleep, and health, that will keep us healthy as we get older. Now, interestingly, if you just start doing all these things at age 50, the things that you can do, you can't fix the environment, but you can do all these other things. All the data shows 7 to 10 more years of healthy aging, freedom of these age-related diseases. That's a lot of healthy aging years. So that's in a general a distillate of the data that's available now.
What is your thought about intermittent fasting, which seems to be extremely popular now?
Yeah, no, this one has got a lot of interest, and I review that in depth in the book because there have been so many studies. It is an effective way to lose weight, but beyond that, there's no clear-cut benefit. And interestingly, we don't even know what schedule is better, whether it's 5 days and two fasting or 4 and 3 and how many hours. I think the best way to summate the evidence is, eat a relatively early dinner and don't eat anything till the following morning. That's an intermittent fast. That helps also keeping weight down. And I don't know that it has any lack of advantage compared to these more rigorous schedules. I think going fasting for a day or two a week is pretty darn tough. So there are people who are fervent about this, but there's a lack of data to show that these very tough schedules are really making a difference besides fostering weight loss.
I recently read the following amazing statistic. Over the last 40 years, Americans have increased their lifespan by 10 years, from in the 70s to in the 80s for some people now. But their health span, the span at which they are healthy, has not increased virtually at all.
That's right.
And what are your thoughts on how we go about it? I think the essential thing is really health span, not lifespan,
Absolutely.
because none of us want to live a long time with no brain.
You got it. So that's a really important point you're making. And I reviewed that and the figures, the data in the book about this dissociation. Yes, we're improving lifespan, but health span is basically sitting still. And we got to that really interesting story when we did the Welderly, we called it the Welderly study. You remember it when we published it back in Cell, and we took 1,400 people who were super agers. They 85 plus, average age in 89, and they had never had any disease or on any medications. They're a hard group to find. And we did whole genome sequencing on them. And this was before whole genome sequencing was being done at scale. And when we analyzed all that data, we found very little to support a genomic basis for healthy aging when we compared to the elderly, which are the people who are 65 with at least one, if not multiple, chronic diseases. So this is the problem. It's not so much a genetic story. It's because we don't have really good lifestyle factors implemented. So for example, 75% of Americans are not physically active to the minimum. And that hasn't really changed in any significant degree. There's a little increase, but not much. We're seeing now finally a little less obesity in the last couple of years, but that almost hit 40% of people. That's a humongous amount of obesity in the United States. And we're seeing that come down maybe because of the GLP-1 drugs that are in getting more common use. But we haven't changed the lifestyle behaviors in a significant degree. We aren't seeing people sleep well, that is, with regularity and getting, high amounts of deep sleep and or these other factors. Plus, Lee, we have done nothing to contain the environmental problems. The air pollution just gets worse. Unlike in China, when of course it went the other direction. Our our Environmental Protection Agency has dropped all of its efforts to reduce things like the plastics in our water and air, microplastics, and the forever chemicals and all the pollution. So we have not done the things we could do to promote health span. And that's without getting into prediction of the diseases, which, I know you're big on, and so am I, to prevent these diseases on a specific, individualized basis.
No, I agree entirely. So I think one of the fascinating issues about lifestyle kinds of things is the fourth P in my four Ps. So the first three are prediction, prevention, personalization. So those are all scientific, and I think we're really coming to some very straightforward, powerful ways to deal with them. The fourth P is
Yeah.
participatory.
Yeah.
How do you persuade people to do what's good for them, or physicians to embrace uh, recommending to their patients, or healthcare leaders, or all the way up finally to politicians? I sat in a bar the other day and heard two guys talking, and one said to the other, "You know, Joe, my doctor asked me to stop drinking, stop smoking, and stop staying out late. He said, those are the only pleasures." And I guess he was in his 60s or something. He said, those are the only pleasures I have in life. How can you ever ask me to give those things up? So, what do we do about this participatory? I mean, it's really a major challenge in all the things we're doing together, I think.
I totally agree with you that this is a big challenge to get people to adopt more healthy lifestyle, which is the basis that we're going to build on. I mean, there are going to be, instead of drugs for treatment, we're going to have drugs for prevention that add to the lifestyle factor. So we're not going to only rely on people having these modifications of their lifestyle. However, as you know, when you have your own data and it says, in 13 years, you're going to have Alzheimer's disease. And we can have specificity like that now, which is amazing
Mhm.
if we don't do anything different. But on the other hand, if we get into high gear about your lifestyle and work on these things, we can defer it X number of years.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hopefully, as we add drugs that will reduce brain inflammation and other important drivers, we can prevent it completely. Now we have a person who has a map of an arc of their health. And as you know, what's really fascinatingly, just a few weeks ago, there was this first large health model. We keep hearing about large language models. This was the first
Right.
large health model published in Nature by Moritz Gersting and colleagues called Delphi 2M. And they could predict the next 20 years of health events in any given individual quite accurately. And that was with GPT-2. Imagine if it was a more advanced model.
Like five, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're looking at now is unparalleled predictive ability, not just yes or no, like you're going to have a heart attack.
Yeah, yeah.
When? But when? And so this gives specificity. Now, what about that person? Are they going to take this seriously? Well, we have some data, like for example, in Finland. In Finland, they provided, as you may recall, polygenic risk scores for heart disease in a large cohort. And in this study, what the people, when they got their high risk for heart disease risk score, those individuals had a remarkable change. They stopped smoking at a high level. They started exercising. So we do have some indicators that people can change when they have a specific recommendation, not these generalized things about everybody should stop this and stop that. I mean, now that doesn't work very well. But when it's
Mhm.
at an individual level, there's a better chance. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. That's
Yeah,
why we need things beyond just lifestyle.
right,
So,
right.
we got to have, I think these GLP-1 drugs and the rest of these gut hormones that have yet been charted as to their effects, these have a big potential impact to add to the prevention of these age-related diseases as we're seeing. And there's many other candidates out there that will provide added power of prevention. So right now we think treat, treat, treat. And I think you would agree it should be prevent, prevent, prevent.
Prevent. Absolutely.
Mm.
All the way. Do you want to talk a little bit about polygenic scores and the enormous opportunity they offer in this regard?
Yes, Lee, I'm so glad you asked that. This is one of my greatest frustrations. I've been trying to get the advocacy for polygenic risk scores for more than a decade. And the reason being is it's so inexpensive. And now it's been updated with hundreds of variants that are tightly associated with each of the major conditions. And as you know better than anyone, this is about the fact that we are these diseases are not Mendelian mutation, single gene stories. They are about what we get a combination of variants from our mother and father's genome. And what's really fascinating is just because it's not in your family history, yes or no, on a particular, let's say you have common cancer. But when you get these variants from each of your parents, that unique combination is a different look completely. And it's picked up by a SNP chip, which is inexpensive, it's highly informative. And these have now had huge, many, many millions of people, hundreds of these studies, and we just sits in a research domain and it isn't being used by patients. In fact, most people don't even know what it is,
Yeah.
no less haven't received it. Now, this is an essential thing because it doesn't tell you when, but it tells you if. It's not deterministic, right? As you know, it's to
Absolutely.
say you have a risk high or low or intermediate for this condition. It's one layer of data. Then you add these other layers like organ clocks, body-wide clocks, markers. Then you see whether or not there's corroboration from one
Yeah.
layer to the other. Now,
Yeah.
polygenic risk scores have become really even more valuable because they can be used as a checkpoint for these other new layers of data. So we should be using them. And in fact, that's one of the most essential parts of prevention is to know if you're at high risk for a particular disease. And it has a link to therapy. So for example, a lot of people don't know if they should take a statin because their LDL is, a bit elevated. But if you're at high risk polygenic heart disease, polygenic risk score,
You should take a statin for sure. Yeah.
absolutely. That's like the best thing we know to indicate that you're going to benefit from a statin. So these are the sorts of things that the public doesn't know about that will help us prevent that heart disease and all these other common cancers that we are not incorporating into medical practice. And it's just so darn frustrating because they should have been part of standard care. Now, in the book, I reviewed that at Mass General Brigham, one of our leading health systems, they have incorporated. They've now made that as available to their health system patients, and that's the way it should be. It's taken one health system to lead the way, and hopefully soon many others will follow.
Yeah. No, I agree. One of the things that we did in a wellness company called Arivale, where we had 5,000 clients, was actually to look at 54 polygenic scores. And for them, we were able to demonstrate in looking at 100 blood metabolites, proteins, and clinical chemistries, that there were beautiful correlations of with increasing genetic risk, increasing probabilities of abnormal expression of metabolites that related to the frank disease itself. And you could actually, as a physician, follow some of those for major diseases and know when the transition, the predicted transition, is coming. And this seems such a compelling argument that the physician should know every one of your polygenic scores and be looking. I mean, the key is you can treat, as you said, high risk people for LDL cholesterol polygenic scores with statins, and that's the only thing that works. Exercise and diet don't work with those people, but the low risk people, it works beautifully. So you want to treat your patients according to their genetic risk and stay away from drugs that may have side effects that are undesirable. So,
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, the other thing that's come along, there was much too much regard for the genome itself, as you will recall,
yeah, yeah,
operating instructions and all this. But now that we have organ clocks from proteins, it's kind of a similar story, right? That using AI, you getting 11,000 up to 11,000 plasma proteins from a couple of
Right.
milliliters of blood, like
Yeah.
what you were saying with metabolites, right?
Right.
Now we have an organ clock for every organ of the body and also the immune system. We never had that before. That's
Yeah.
what's so exciting because you can spot, oh, your immune system is down. That is, it's older by 8 years than your actual age. Something's off track here. Now you are susceptible to cancer. Your immune system isn't working, right? And the same thing with heart. The heart clock is out of whack and
Yep.
your polygenic risk score is really high. So we didn't have this stuff before. And
Yeah.
we didn't have the machine intelligence of being able to look at all these data, as you know.
And integrate them together. Yeah.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
as you've seen, when you have labs that are in the normal range, the doctor just says, oh, okay, everything's good. The patient looks at in the portal, oh, everything's good. The AI looks at all these labs and say, you know what? We got a problem. This trend is in the wrong direction.
That's
This
it.
is
Abs-
worrisome for pancreatic cancer, for example.
Yeah.
So we have the data, or we can have the data. Now we have a way to analyze it. That's what's so extraordinary.
So, Eric, you make a really nice point in the book that these things called rare genetic diseases aren't so rare when you consider the population as a whole, because there are 10,000 or so different rare diseases. And what, 5 or 6% of the population end up having one of these kind of things. Do you, I mean, one very exciting new approach to that, of course, is genome editing.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about rare diseases and what they're triggering with regard to this, one of the most powerful potential techniques in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a chapter on this because it isn't just the rare diseases as you're getting at. A lot of these have transferability to the common diseases. So, firstly, CRISPR, as people know, is the essence of genome editing. The one we are using today that's approved, for example, in sickle cell disease, is the primitive form of genome editing, so-called CRISPR 1.0. It creates uh, breaks in both strands of DNA, and then it relies on the body's repair, and it's somewhat erratic. And now we're already zoomed forward to CRISPR 3.0, where we can do such exquisite and specific uh, repair of a faulty genome. And so what we are seeing, which is extraordinary, and I'll go back to heart disease again because that's where there's been a big jump. There's two companies that are doing genome editing for people with this rare condition of familial hypercholesterolemia. And they're focused on a particular gene, ANGPTL3. That's not important. The point is that when you fix that gene with CRISPR 2.0, which is base editing, the people have a remarkable plummeting of their cholesterol, LDL cholesterol.
Mhm.
Now, what's great about that is that's a one shot, and these are people who are very hard to control with all the drugs we have today. And so this is like the first time we've seen the light that imagine a baby that's born with such a severe cholesterol buildup problem, who by the time they're in their teens, they already have obstructed arteries. If you could give a shot of this, as a baby, but even more broad is what about if we just had people with high cholesterol and it was safe to use this editing and didn't have to take statins or antibodies or ezetimibe, but just take a shot and you're good for the rest of your life. That's the kind of potential in a common disease that we're learning from a rare disease. Now, I don't
Mhm.
know if we're going to get there, but of course, there's some big bets being put on this. And it has some real appeal. And this is just one example of many. So, rare diseases, we need treatments to prevent their untoward impact, but also it's not just about the rare diseases, of course.
Eric, it'd be great to have you talk a little bit about one of the most dramatic advances in all of medicine, and that's the GLP-1
Yeah.
and so forth. I mean, first, the story of how they came about and got delayed so long is utterly fascinating. But second, we're still figuring out things that they can do and improve. And there are some side effects that people have to be aware about. So I think our audience would love to hear about the details of that story.
Yeah, no, it's quite a story, Lee, and it's still, of course, a developing one. And there's a whole chapter in the book about it. So, the first thing that I found fascinating is that these drugs have been around for 20 some years, approved by the FDA, not just around. But it took almost 20 years to think, oh, we should try it in obesity. And the reason was that in the treatment for diabetes, which they had a very secure benefit in randomized trials, and that's what led to the FDA approval, that was fascinating because these people didn't lose any weight. With the same doses, the same drugs, the diabetics, type 2 diabetics, they never lose the same weight as people who are just obese. And we still don't know why, Lee. But there were a couple of noted scientists, one at Novo Nordisk and another, that basically pushed hard to get this to be studied in obesity despite the lack of a signal. And of course, as you know, they've had tremendous impact. And there's many more of these gut hormone mimetics or agonists, if you will, that are in the pipeline. Not just the two that people talk about today, Ozempic and Zepbound, but rather another, a whole crop of them. There's one that's a triple receptor that you don't ever stop losing weight. I mean, it's so potent. And there's quadruple receptors. And then there's single receptors of these hormones, gut hormones, that we haven't even yet seen in large clinical trials. So the future here, now that we've seen that this family of drugs, not just losing weight or helping type 2 diabetes, we're talking about liver disease, kidney disease, heart disease, migraine headaches, arthritis, autoimmune diseases. So, Lee, we just started last week a trial in long COVID, the first large-scale placebo-controlled trial of tirzepatide, and that just launched last week. We already have over 400 people that are getting enrolled or starting that process. And this is a trial, it hasn't been a long COVID large trial, which is incredible in 5 years. But we think this drug has a chance because it has such potent anti-inflammatory action.
Now, that's the one that has three receptor targets.
That's two. It's
It's
GL,
two.
the glucagon-like peptide 1 and GIP. So those two receptors are more potent than the one, Ozempic. And what's fascinating about this drug class, I mean, it's even helping, as you know, with marked reduction in addiction to cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, nail biting, gambling. This is remarkable. We've never seen anything like this. Now, the big thing is whether it's going to inhibit the progression or allow prevention of Alzheimer's. And there's two trials that are pending. They should be out very soon, testing large scale Ozempic or placebo in people with mild Alzheimer's. That's a very formidable challenge. We would much prefer to study these drugs to prevent people at high risk, not when they already have.
Have the disease.
Yeah, but if
Absolutely.
that hits too, oh my gosh, we've never had a disease modifying drug in people with that potent. We've had the weak drugs that are very complex and expensive too that are approved by FDA that have marginal benefit. But this is really interesting. We'll see how that plays out.
So, how do you feel about aging? I mean, it is anti-inflammatory, and that's certainly one of the large signals in aging. So, is anyone looking seriously at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I found the most uh, telling about healthy aging is that it wasn't in our genome, but rather it's in our immunome. Our immune system is a really important uh, and dominant contributor to healthy aging. Now, what's fascinating, again, you know this so well, we have no immune system test in the clinic. Here it is, we're almost 2026. This is incredible, Lee. We have nothing to
Yep.
tell us about the function of our lymphocytes, our T cells and B cells, our antibodies, our interferons, nothing, nothing. Now, we do have studies in first-rate labs, like your colleague who was recently awarded the Nobel Prize for the work in Tregs that are really
Right.
important, T cells. But we have never had an assay in the clinic. And what's amazing, so for example, if you look at all the studies that now we understand the immune system, this is the immunosenescence, our
Hmm.
deteriorating immune system as we get older, inflammaging, the fact that we have this very unhelpful, harmful body-wide and brain inflammation as we get older that's induced by our faulty immune system. So if we have ways to work on that, so I'll give you an example, the shingles vaccine. The shingles vaccine obviously was directed to prevent shingles herpes zoster reactivation. But now three huge natural experiments, which are better than randomized trials.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wales, Scotland, the US, and two more that are soon to be published. There'll be five natural experiments in cumulatively millions of people. The people who got the shingles vaccine, two doses, had a 20 to 25% reduction of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Now, why is that big? Well, if that was a drug, that would be considered the ultimate.
Fantastic success.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not because the herpes zoster was the cause of the Alzheimer's, but rather we amped up the immune system in these people for protection. And this is, I think, what we're learning, that this is the secret that we have not. When you don't measure it, of course, you're ignorant. And now, from the academic publications, the labs that are all over this, the immune system is lighting up as a critical determinant of healthy aging. And that's also, as we discussed earlier, Lee, how these lifestyle factors work. I mean, exercise, anti-inflammatory
Absolutely.
diet, good
Absolutely.
sleep. These things are helping our immune system as well.
So, Eric, you're a major player in this major U.S. genome project, the All of Us program. Do you want to briefly describe that and talk about the benefits that are starting to emerge?
Yeah, so this study is the most ambitious in medical research in American history. And it's amazing to me, so many people are still not aware it's been ongoing since 2017, and it's enrolled over 850,000 American participants. And unlike the UK Biobank, which is the most established biobank in the world, that's enrolled 550,000, in that cohort, which has been instrumental to understand so much about health and disease. But 95% of those individuals are white, are European ancestry. In the All of Us, 50% are from underrepresented minorities. So it's not only very large, but it's also the most diverse participant cohort. And so we have, as you said, had hundreds of thousands have had their whole genome sequenced. And also, we've had sensors like Fitbit in tens of thousands, and they're going through many layers of data, and we've already seen some contributions. So, for example, polygenic risk scores that we can improve, understanding more about rare diseases. So, it's a project that unfortunately has had big funding challenges in the new administration. and hopefully we'll get that patched up so it can go on for decades ahead. But I think it's a really, so much has been invested of the public support of NIH to do this project. And I think it's something that is, we should be proud of it. And there's so much more data. It's open to all researchers. So it's a rich resource.
Absolutely. So, do you want to comment on the disparity between the rich and the poor with regard to health care? And if we can do all of these wonderful things, how can we assure that it can reach all people rather than those who may be able to spend a little extra money to include and do things and frankly get better food and better health care and all of these things?
Yeah, no, you're bringing up a central topic because those longevity influencers we've talked about are largely catering to the hyper affluent. We're not, the interest here is that it should be for all, and especially the people who need it most, which are people in the lower socioeconomic group, whether that's Americans or whether that's countries that are low income, middle income countries. And so the strategies we have to extend Healthspan need to be of global reach. They can't be just for rich people. And that's why what's exciting, what we talked about, these things, first of all, things like exercise, um, and better sleep health, they don't cost anything. You know, they're low cost. Even the proper diet isn't like foods that are healthy are costing more than unhealthy. Just there's lack of support for healthy foods.
Yeah.
And getting rid of as much as we can the incriminating foods within the ultra processed food category that are really noxious. But then we have these for things that we've been talking about, like um, the genome and the proteome and these biomarkers. They're very inexpensive, and the investment to get those available for everyone who would be willing to get that done that is if you prevent one case of Alzheimer's, just think of how much savings that is, not just the burden of health on a family member. And then, of course, cancer. The treatments for cancer are so ridiculously expensive and of relatively little impact on survival, relatively. So we've got to get into prevention with low cost things that are a prudent investment. We're not talking about total body MRI, which is expensive, which is being promoted to the hilt by celebrities and longevity influencers. We're talking about a saliva blood test stuff that can be done at scale for very cheap, right? And informative and AI software that should be free. Okay. So this is an opportunity. Now, is it going to happen in the US? No, not likely, because we don't have a healthcare system that looks after our population. We have uneven, gross inequities. We have no health, like, for example, in countries, every other rich country, they have uh, a plan to look after their population and make investments that would reduce cost and health burden. We don't have such a thing here. And I hope someday we will. But these things we've talked about today are going to be much more likely to take hold in other countries that are positioned much better with a mission to not have health inequities.
So I'm going to start with some questions from the audience now.
Yeah, great.
And the first one is really one that I've batted my head against unsuccessfully for 20 years now. And that is, what changes in medical training need to be established to take advantage of these new opportunities?
I'm with you on that. 20 years of vexing lack of progress. There's 150 medical schools in the United States. Genomics is not in the curriculum. AI is not in the curriculum. Digital medicine is not in the curriculum. So we aren't keeping up with the field, all these advances. And this is unfortunate. In a few medical schools, there are electives, but
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
it's, even nutrition is under recognized its importance among medical schools. Um, so
Well, I'll
we,
tell you, Eric, what I'm trying to do is meet Alice Walton, who has started a
uh,
new
yes,
medical school in Arkansas, and its mission is well-being and prevention. And
yes.
that sounds to me like exactly the place where we could have a revolution that makes a difference
You
in
know,
in
it's
medical education and train people that are aware of these uniquely applicable opportunities that we've talked about here.
Yeah, no, I am full agreement. And Ariana Huffington has been a big proponent of that new medical school in Arkansas, supported by the Walton family. I'm with you. This is what we need. I had started a medical school back in 2000, and it should have been focused on prevention. And now it must be. All medical schools should be really pushing on this. But I think the reality, Lee, as you know, it's like, turning the direction of a battleship. It doesn't exactly happen quickly, but what will help foster it and gets back to your participatory and your four Ps is when patients go to their doctors and say, I want this, or I read about this or that. Eventually, that will help drive the not just the medical students, but the practicing physicians, which are, almost a million doctors
Yep.
in the United States. That's what will help drive them to a better place that is, really where we should be to prevent the big major age-related diseases.
Yep. I'll tell you another really interesting physician population are the best of the functional medicine physicians who really embrace the idea of wellness and prevention all the way. Of course, you have to separate those from the not so good
Yeah, yeah.
functional physicians. But that's the challenge we have in looking at anybody who promotes wellness to see whether or not they're actually evidence-based or not.
Yeah,
Second
I think
question.
unfortunately that wellness term has become abused, and it's really, really sad because
It is sad.
initially it was made to as a term to integrate physical and mental health and promote well-being, and it's degraded by so many that are using it with to support things that have zero evidence and even some risk and great expense too. So yeah, but I'm with you otherwise.
What is your stance on alcohol intake? Is there any amount that is not harmful to one's health?
Yeah, well, I'd go back to your conversation you heard in the bar, taking away alcohol completely from people without compelling data is kind of difficult. I think the general sense we have is that the lower the quantity, the better. But to say any alcohol intake is injurious, really, first of all, that's all people. And that's like treating us all like cattle, like we're all somehow the same. We each have different sensitivities, risk from whatever we take in, right? Secondly, there are conflicting data. The National Academy of Medicine concluded by going into each of these reports with the actual raw data
Yeah,
that there wasn't a risk at low levels.
wow.
And two drinks a day, it was okay in men, and one drink a day total, cumulative for a week, seven. Of course, that's totally different from other studies that indicate there is risk,
Yeah,
particularly for breast cancer in women. So it's all over the place. The point being is low amounts and what is a low amount? Lee, I had a patient that came in to clinic, and at the end of the visit, the wife said, "Is it okay that he continues drinking moderately?" I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And she said, "Well, he has six beers and two tequilas every night." And so I said, what? I thought she was joking, Lee, but she was
Oh,
asking legitimately. Is, I said, well,
yep,
I'm sorry, that's not moderate. So,
that's
point,
very heavy. Yeah.
yeah, the point being is moderate amounts, which, if you're not ever having more than one drink at a sitting in a day, that would be in that moderate grouping. So we know binge drinking is a problem. We know alcohol in general is toxic to our GI system. And so the more of that, the more likely we're going to have mutations, somatic mutations across our GI tract, whether that's in the esophagus or the colon or, stomach or whatever. So what about the people who are susceptible to colon cancer? They should probably be a little different than the people who aren't.
Yeah.
And so this stupid recommendation, we keep doing this, Lee. We say everyone should follow this recommendation. Well, you know what? We're unique.
We're all different.
Yeah,
The key.
absolutely. Even identical twins are unique.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
why do we have to break it down to stupid ways? I don't get it.
Here's an interesting question. At what point will personalized specific health assessments and interventions like polygenic scores be available to all people and not just those who can afford them? How do we get this information if medical insurance doesn't cover it?
Yeah. So in the study, we're starting to prevent Alzheimer's in January. Of course, we're getting all that for each person free. But while we've done that, we've worked with these companies to get the price down, and it's actually extraordinary. So, for example, these companies that were measuring 6,000 or up to 11,000 plasma proteins in the blood that are partitioned to make the organ clocks by AI,
Yeah.
that used to be $900. We're getting that down to $50. Okay. And as I mentioned, the polygenic risk score, we're getting that down to below $100. And, we're getting it to make it low cost so that it would be, most lab tests are more expensive than what we're.
Our clinical chemistries are incredibly
Yeah,
expensive.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you can get a whole genome sequence now for $200. This is a
Yep.
bargain. So when you put it, insurance companies should cover this. Here's again the American problem. These insurance companies, they have no interest because they only really covering somebody for a year. What do they care about long-term prevention?
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to have a countrywide dedicated effort to prevent. And that's why it's so unlikely to happen here. But when you get a few lab tests that we talked about for a couple $100 and it prevents, any one of these major age-related diseases, this is a
It's
big,
well worth it.
yeah, yeah. But you know what? When are we going to see it here? The person who asked that question that's a really good question. But you may go to other countries and you'll see it.
Here's a great one. If you were on an elevator and had 30 seconds to tell someone the 5 top things any person should do to improve their health, what would you say?
Well, I'd probably hit on exercise really hard because that one is
I agree with you.
important.
That one, it seems to me, trumps almost all the rest.
Yeah. And then once you get in the groove with exercise, you're much more likely to be attending to a better diet, to be at a better weight, to
Yep.
be, thinking about, getting a healthy sleep as well, and a lot of these other things. That sets the tone. So if I had that elevator pitch, I'd go with that one.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we're almost at the end of the hour, Eric. Is there a last comment you'd like to make before we close down?
Well, just Lee, it's been great to be with you. You've been such a big inspiration in this field. You've been way ahead. Everyone will remember the 4 Ps that you pulled together and so many things that you've done to promote human health throughout your career, no less life science. So it's been a real privilege for me to be with you today, and I really enjoyed our conversation and the great questions that the people who joined brought to the group, brought to us.
It's great. I've really enjoyed it too, Eric, and it's going to take a village to make all these changes, but they're inevitable. I think the only question is how long we're going to have to wait.
You got it. Just a matter of time.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. It's been a most enjoyable session.
Thanks, Lee. You take care.
Okay.